everyone, this is Dan here with a quick review of Castlevania Lord of Shadows Mirror of Fate for the Nintendo 3DS. I would like to preface this review by saying that I don't think this game is as bad as so many reviews led me to believe. I really wanted to try the game out because I'm a Castlevania fan, but all that being taken into consideration, the game fails to achieve the high standards of the other games in the series that we played on the Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS. So if you're expecting this game to be exactly like those, you might be a little disappointed. The majority of my gripes about the game come from the fact that it doesn't feel like what I expected out of a Castlevania game after having enjoyed the Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS titles so thoroughly. Lord of Shadows feels like it needed a few more months to polish because the game developer Mercury Stream tried to take the game in a new direction and just sort of ended up feeling half-baked. The game ends up feeling like it's having an identity crisis. It's not exactly God of War and not exactly Castlevania. It actually ends up feeling like a DS Spider-Man or Batman game at some points. Mirror of Fate has done away with the save rooms of past games and implemented an auto-save feature, which wasn't bad but felt more constricting. And in prior games, finding new save rooms always felt like a good checkpoint to end your session. However, in Mirror of Fate, the game saves constantly, but it's sometimes hard to know if a game saved or not because the save icon will appear very shortly and can be hard to spot amidst all the action. Although some of the puzzles are fun in this game, they feel very randomly tacked on, like more of an afterthought. There are a lot of bosses in this game, but not enough enemies scattered across the maps. At many points it felt like there was just nothing going on and I had to backtrack so far, and there was just nothing to really entertain you between that, and it just made the game end up feeling very empty. And again, in prior games, it felt like enemies would always respawn whenever I went into a room, and that would help you do things like collect money or gain experience, collect souls, but that's not really what's happening here. Due to the clunky controls of the game, it feels more of like a God of War type game than a precise, skillful, tightly controlled Castlevania game. And that was probably the biggest shock to me. I'm used to Castlevania games having tight controls with fast movement, but here you have these button press combos that just end up being random button mashes, really, and just doesn't feel like a lot of skill goes into defeating your enemies, especially the bosses, which just end up feeling like a button mash fest filled with checkpoints. The game's graphics are very unstable and have that jagged edge effect you see in a lot of games that kind of drives me crazy. If you look close after you stop running in the game, you can see the pixels shifting around in the background trying to assemble the picture. The best way I can describe the art style of the cutscenes is that they resemble a tattoo your shady best friend gave you in high school that didn't even look cool at the time you got it, but once you had it done, it was too late to turn back. And maybe the developers just didn't have a very good art direction. Worst of all is that you cannot skip cutscenes even if you have already seen them before. After you die, you have to watch them again, and in some cases I ended up watching them many times over, and it was time-consuming and frustrating. It is like someone spilled ink on a bunch of emo anime characters. And after a while I grew to sort of appreciate the graphics of the game, though I wouldn't go so far to say that they were anything to write home about. Another issue is that during one or two brief segments, the 3DS screen was too small to really see the character when the camera zoomed out. The characters and voice acting are very bad, with cheesy dialogue and several boring stories going on at once. Then you have these scrolls you pick up throughout the game that give you experience points when you read them, and they are filled with these story pieces that are so laughably bad. Some of them are even illogical too. For example, at least one of them was a guy writing on a scroll in his final moments before being killed by a dragon or monster or something. I mean, who in their right mind is sitting with a quill, pen, and ink and writing on parchment while they're waiting to be pummeled into eternal damnation? Another one of the scrolls makes a reference to a plumber that seems like an obvious nod at Mario, but nothing was really entertaining, and these just seemed like a waste of time to read. The story and game overall is very forgettable. As I mentioned earlier, the bosses always feel randomly placed and poorly designed. Of course, many bosses have a trick that you can figure out, or a pattern, but there's also a certain level of randomization so that they aren't totally predictable. That isn't really a problem though. What my problem is that because of the clunky controls, you almost always die several times during boss battles. After you die, you are respawned in the middle of a boss fight. Back in my day, when you died during a boss, you had to start from square one. Not in this case. You end up just button mashing random combos until you beat the boss because it takes too long to figure out the pattern, or there are random button press sequences that seem to pop up out of nowhere, and if you miss them, you die. The controls are just very clunky, and it sort of seems like they could have benefited from a little tune-up. To me, it is so much more satisfying to figure out the boss's pattern and then use it to win, but unless you replay the game, you will not have that pleasure here. On the flip side, you have unlimited lives, and the checkpoints throughout the bosses will keep you making progress. I know I said a lot of bad things about this game, but underneath it all, there's a decent platformer. But there are so many other great games out for the Nintendo 3DS right now, and a lot of great platformers. For example, Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D, although a port of a Wii game, is a much better platformer than this. Not to mention all the Nintendo DS Castlevanias, which would be much better alternatives in my opinion. Also, more recently, Shovel Knight was released through the eShop for only $14.99, which I would also say is a better game. New Super Mario Bros. 2 is a better game. If you're a fan of the Castlevania series, I would recommend throwing your expectations out the door and expecting the worst, because when you expect the worst, you might be more likely to be surprised by the good things about this game. Overall, I would recommend keeping this game at the bottom of your wish list, but if you're out of games, or you just have to get a little Castlevania fix, or maybe you're in the mood to play something spooky for October or whatever, this game, it's worth checking out if you have the time, but other than that, there's nothing too special here. This is just my opinion, but I would love to hear yours down below. Let me know what you thought of this game, what Castlevania game is your favorite of all time, and what kind of reviews would you like to see me do next. Leave a comment below, like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for watching.